Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the sanctuary. I'm Mike Robertson, and I'm thrilled that you've decided to join us for a few moments this Sunday morning and spend some time together learning something new about God, hopefully. And just being in a community, even if it's a virtual community, it has its own benefits. So thank you for being here. Thank you for those who share the link for this broadcast every week. That means a lot. We have more people watch us on YouTube than ever show up on Sunday morning, and that's great. I don't know how to account for that unless it's people just passing it to another person, and that's wonderful. So thank you for doing that. Please continue doing that. Announcements this morning, I don't have many. Really, I only have one thing I want to say. If you got the email about this broadcast, you know already about our Zoom on Wednesday night is a little bit different now going forward because we've got a recurring Zoom room number. And that means each week the link will be exactly the same. We'll still send it to you, but if you want to bookmark it or you want to write down the meeting number, you can access it at any time. It will always be the same. And so you won't have to go hunt for the latest email. You can look at any of the emails or at your own bookmarks and go right to the Zoom room. And I want you especially to know that this Wednesday night is a great time for you to invite somebody to join the Zoom room, because I'm starting a 2-part series this Wednesday night that I think everybody will love. Everybody that's ever seen it has just raved about it. And I think it's one of the coolest things I've ever done. I haven't heard anybody approach this same subject. So what we're going to start this Wednesday night is part 1 of a 2-part series that's called Hymns for Hippies. There's one now. Hymns for Hippies. And what this 2-week series does is to take a look at a time when many of us were teenagers. In the late 60s, something happened that had never happened before. All of a sudden, instead of the top 40 just being filled with songs about romance or partying or driving your car real fast, there began to be songs, big hit songs about spiritual matters, spiritual things like brotherly love, like songs about God, songs even about Jesus. And it's not just 1, 2, or 3 songs. I'm going to show you how many songs were in alignment with this theme, and you're going to be amazed. You're going to be amazed. And so I'll be sharing lots of clips with you, lots of titles, some behind-the-scenes stuff that you don't already know. So I promise you, if you like music at all, you're going to enjoy this series. And it's a great time to share with people who don't like things that are too churchy or too theological. This is just far out. It's just a far out series. So share the link when you get it in the next email. If you haven't already got it from the last one, we'll send you another one on Tuesday or Wednesday. Distribute that link to your friends, your family. I think they will really enjoy it. And it's a great way for us to do outreach, even in the midst of a quarantine. All right, I think that's all I got to plug. So let's get to today's message, which is called Reading Somebody Else's Diary. Now, I'm surrounded by props here today. You should see it. It looks like a Carrot Top show is about to take place. But some of you in the audience today will know what this is. Some of you may not be very familiar with it. Nowadays, these are still around. They went away for a while. They're coming back. Nowadays, they're called a vinyl. Oh, I've got that vinyl. But to me, this is a record. When I grew up, this was a record album. And I spent a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of my brain power accumulating a whole bunch of these. They're records of a band or a musician or an artist of some kind, records at a moment in time that are preserved. So it's a record, yeah, we say this object is a record, but it's also a record in the same way that you put your handprint in some cement. That's a record. That's going to stay there. It's going to be visible for a long time. So these records, I had a ton of them, and then they were made obsolete. And I had to buy the same albums, the same records over again on compact disc. And I know I'm not alone in that. So I got them all on CD. Guess what? CDs were made obsolete. Now all my music is in the air. It's in the cloud. I can access it from just about anywhere. But I still like these records because they're a physical object of a moment in time that's frozen. Well, I found another record of a different kind one time years ago, Lisa and I had not been married very long. We were in an antique mall one day. We were wild and crazy people. We were in an antique mall, and I was looking in this glass display case, and there was a little tiny notebook about this tall and this wide, and it was open under the glass cabinet, and it was just covered. The pages were covered with a tiny little pencil script. And I asked one of the salespeople if I could take a look at it, and she told me that it was the diary of a World War I soldier. And he started this diary the day he got his draft notice. He wrote in it every day from the time he got his draft notice to the time he went to New York, to the time he shipped out to France. And he tells about being put on the front lines in France and the horrible things he saw and the terrible things that happened to him, severe lack of food and shelter. And he tells the whole story until the day he is discharged. And I bought it. I'd never seen a diary for sale before. I thought, how could anybody give this up? How could anybody let this go? I don't know if he didn't have family or what, but it seemed like a very valuable artifact to me. And I bought it and took it home. And every time we went to an antique mall after that, I looked. And I never found another diary. It was a very rare thing. Well, then a few years went by, and eBay came along. And when eBay came along, anybody who collected anything, the thrill of the hunt was largely gone, because you could hit click, oh, there's one, or click, oh, there's 12 of these. And then you just pick out which one you want and place a bid or just pay the price, and you got it, something you may have been looking for decades. Well, I began looking on eBay, and I found there were a lot of diaries for sale. And I started buying them. And eventually, I had a whole vintage suitcase full of them. It's sitting right here beside me, but it's too heavy for me to hold up and show you. But here's a picture of it I took just a few minutes ago. They come in all sizes, all colors, all shapes, all different years, all different sorts of people. And I learned some things about buying diaries. I learned they're not all created equal. The oldest diary I have is this one right here. This is a diary from 1894. It's 126 years old. It's the oldest diary I have, but I'm sorry to say it's not the most interesting diary I have. For instance, here's the first entry in this diary. A pleasant day for New Year. Ann Merrill came today. That's it. That's January the 1st. So, not super interesting, but it's pretty old for a diary to realize that somebody wrote this 126 years ago. I discovered as I began to bid on more and more diaries what you wanted to get and what you didn't want to get. I learned that you did not want to get the 5-year diary. The 5-year diary on each page, like January 1, says 1940. Then below it is 3 lines, 1941, 3 lines, 1942. And it has space for you to write 3 lines every day for 5 years in the same book. Well, as you can imagine, there's not much room to write detail when you've got 3 lines and you're supposed to keep up with this book for 5 years. But I avoided those kinds of diaries. I instead looked for diaries that had 1 page per day because people tended to write more. Even then, you might get something great or you might get something just, meh. For instance, this guy. This is a diary from 1962. A guy that worked for the highway department or the road work department in upstate New York. And every day he starts out with a paragraph, not a sentence, a whole paragraph about the weather. He'll tell what the temperature is at 6 a.m. and the temperature at noon and the temperature at 7 p.m. and what the sky looked like. He does that every day. And then he'll write the rest of the page about what he did that day. And folks, what he did that day was not interesting. He was mainly repairing roads spreading tar, spreading what he called crack filler on places where the road had cracked. And he tells in pretty great detail every place he goes and what he works on every day. And I thought, wow, something must have stood out in this year to him. What was going on in history in 1962? 1962, let's see. The Cuban Missile Crisis was in October of 1962. If you don't remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, or if you weren't around during that time, Russia had placed missiles in Cuba that would be able to reach the United States. And our satellite surveillance revealed them. And President Kennedy had a standoff with Castro and Khrushchev. And he said, those missiles have to be taken out or else. The situation got very tense. Our military forces were on high alert, the highest they'd ever been during a peacetime period. And everybody was waiting to see what happened because it seemed like we were on the brink of World War III. If one of those missiles gets fired, World War III would have happened. So I thought, okay, let's see what this guy thought on the day the big deadline arrived. And it was time for Cuba and Russia to either surrender or agree to Kennedy's demands or not. Monday, October 22nd, 1962. Weather, foggy. Cool early morning fog, clearing, but some cloudiness with some sunshine. Milder later in the day. Temperature at 6:30 a.m., 36. Temperature at 4:30 p.m., 60. Temperature at 9:15 p.m., 47. Okay, he did that every day. What did he write the rest of the page? Chopped up crack filler and put it in a tar kettle. Heated it and went up on Route 38 and poured cracks on concrete from end of concrete north of Krause's farm to nearly end of Route 38 by Turner's Bridge. Fills up the rest of the page with that. Even being on the brink of World War III did not intrude in this guy's consciousness. What did? Why did he think he should record his life? Every page is written on in his diary. Lots of details about nothing. Why did he think, I got to write all this stuff down? I'm going to need to remember this someday. The only interesting thing that ever happens in his diary is this. A couple of times a week, he will write something like this. I went over to Lois Whipple's house after dinner. Lois Whipple. Lois Whipple. I would like to know more about Lois Whipple. He never calls her anything but Lois Whipple. Never says Lois. He always goes over after dinner. She never fixes dinner for him. He never takes her anywhere. He goes over to visit her after dinner, and that's all he says. He doesn't ever say, I think I really like Lois Whipple. He doesn't say anything like that. It's just this blip in this boring, boring diary. I don't know why he wanted to preserve that record. That was his permanent record of a life that seems pretty mundane. But on the other hand, here's one of the most interesting diaries I found. It's a little tiny thing. It's a 1936 diary by a woman named Gertrude. Gertrude lives in Portland, Oregon, and she is a bitter, unhappy woman. Now, this is a one-year diary, but it is a whole week per page. Let me show you what that looks like. That's one page of the diary, and it's this size. It's this big. So she has to write teeny tiny little letters. But I found out from reading this whole diary why Gertrude was in such a bad mood. She was in love with a married man. And he kept promising her he was going to leave his wife and they would finally be together. And she would write things in her little diary, in her tiny little handwriting. She would say, tomorrow is the big day. Finally, everything will be great. things are finally going to go my way. And then the next day she would write something like, I guess it's not going to happen. It's not to be. Why is my life so sad? Why can't things ever work out my way? Wow. I was very intrigued by her diary. She's very, very angry, very bitter, very depressed. And I never read a diary quite like that. And so I liked it. I kept it. I thought, this is the one that's worth all the hunting I have done to find it. And then in one of life's bizarre little circumstances, about 3.5 years went by, and I had pretty much stopped buying diaries on eBay. I had a suitcase full of them. And one day I thought, I haven't looked at eBay in a while. I'm going to take a look and see what's available on there. And so I type in vintage diaries, and I find a 1950 diary. And I bought it. And when I got it, I realized this was a diary of a woman named Gertrude who lived in Portland, Oregon. See, this is 14 years after this diary. 14 years later, and guess what? Gertrude is still waiting for this man to leave his wife. She's still saying, why can't things ever work out for me? She's still angry. She's still bitter. She's still depressed. See, Gertrude didn't realize she could change her story. She could write a different story in her diary. It was all up to her. And she never really got that message. I don't know how much longer her pining after this man went, but chances are it didn't stop in 1950. Have you ever kept a diary? Even if you didn't write anything down on paper, you are still sort of creating a record of your life every day, just by the things you do, the things that matter to you. What could we learn about you, for instance, if we look through your purse or your wallet or your medicine cabinet or your desk drawer, or we looked at the things that are stuck on your refrigerator with magnets? What would we learn about you? I think we could learn quite a bit. I did keep a diary for quite a few years, and I keep it in a vintage suitcase too, but this one is actually small enough I can hold it up. But I have a lot of diaries in here. I have a few more. And while these are valuable, or these other diaries are valuable as collector's items, these are much more valuable to me because they're mine. They are mine. They are my permanent record. I'm invested in these. I can look back through my diaries, though, and I'm almost always embarrassed by what I find. I read a diary from 35 years ago, and I go, what a doofus I was. How selfish I was. How immature I was. The things that mattered to me then seem shallow to me now. And I'm often embarrassed when I look back. I look at these old diaries and I see that I made mistakes. I learned, though, that reading these other diaries, these people made mistakes also. They had happy times. They had sad times. They had people close to them die, and they had to find a way to deal with grief. I had to do the same thing. So I see some common ground between my diaries and their diaries. I also find my resolutions every year, though. And they're almost exactly the same every year. For instance, this diary has these resolutions. Number 1, quit this job and move to Austin. Number 2, lose some weight. Number 3, find a beautiful, wonderful woman. Those pop up year after year. They're standards. They're almost cliches. In our house, behind one of the doors. You can't see it unless you close the door and you're inside the room. On the door jamb, you may have this too. On the door jamb, there are pencil marks, a series of pencil marks. You start down low, and that's where the first time we measured Lindsay's height, we put the date on there. And then a few months would go by, or maybe a year or two would go by, and then there's a mark a little bit higher, how tall she was, and then a little bit higher, and a little bit higher. And you see these marks, and you can see the progress. You can see the growth. They become a record of their own of how this child of ours grew over the years. And that's what I find when I look back at my diaries. I see the times I was depressed, or the times I was lonely, the times I was wondering about my future. What was I going to do with my life? But they're not all like that. They're not all depressing like Gertrude's. There's some fun things, some exciting things, some interesting things. And if I go forward just a little bit in this diary, I can read the page when I had my first date with a wonderful, beautiful woman named Lisa Shelton. It's right here on this page, right here. And I can read in this diary, exactly a year later, I can read the day I proposed to her. And later that year, the day that we got married. And I can read in this diary the day we sat in a doctor's office and we listened to the heartbeat of what would turn out to be a beautiful baby girl. See, these are valuable to me. Not just because they're a record of what happened, but because I can look back at them and see I've made progress. I'm not exactly the same as I used to be. I have grown in some ways. And you know what? I don't have to make reservations like that. I don't have to make a reservation that I want to move to Austin. I made it. I don't have to make reservations that I hope I can find a job I really love. I made it. I don't have to make a resolution about hoping to meet a wonderful, beautiful woman. I made it. We won't talk about the weight one, okay? 2 out of 3 ain't bad. That one may still pop up every year or so. But most of these resolutions have changed. I can look back at my permanent record and I can see I actually accomplished some things. I became in many ways a better person. But let me mention a couple other books. This is sort of God's diary. Think about it. It is the record of God's interaction with human beings. And God writes a heck of a diary. It's hard to compete with God's diary as far as achievement and progress. I can't start my diary out like he does. January 1st, today, created light. January 2nd, created the heavens and the earth. Well, I don't have anything that can relate to that. No way to top that. But it's a record like all these other books, mine and other people. It's filled with triumphs and tragedies and wars and peace and deaths and births and marriages and miracles and guidelines and blessings and advice. It's a beautiful thing that God has preserved for us. Do you remember how the Gospel of John begins? John's Gospel begins with this statement. In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. See, words are important to God. That's the first thing John mentions, is how important the Word, Jesus, was to God. That's why we are able to have a Bible today. The words of God matter to us. We have this word because he still wants to speak to us. He still wants to have a relationship with us. He still is sharing his words with us, and he is still writing his story. One last book. You probably have some books like this around. There's nothing written in this book at all. Every page is just waiting for something to be written on it. And this book doesn't even have dates at the top. Because you know what? You don't have to wait for New Year's Day to start anew, to write a different chapter in your life. You don't even have to wait for Monday or another day at all. You can decide that right now. You can decide every day is a New Year's Day. And you get to decide whether you want to write a boring page or a fascinating page. See, my hope, my goal, when I write my story in a book like this, is that it coincides with this book so much that it begins to seem like a sequel or a spinoff or a new chapter of this book. Wouldn't it be great if the story of your life was a continuation of the story of God communicating with human beings? Well, it is. It is, if you think about it that way. And the God of this book can erase all the bad parts of these other books. All the times when you were ashamed or depressed or worried, God can take those passages out and you go back and look at them and God says, I don't see it. It's gone. It's clean. It's made brand new. The Bible tells us old things are passed away and all things are become new. If any man is in Christ, he is a new creation. You don't have to wait for a holiday or a Monday or another day. You don't even have to wait 1 hour to start writing a better story. When I look back at my own diaries, I can see that the times I really grew were the times I was most aligned with this book. That's when I really changed, when I really discovered things, when I really felt peace and began to understand what an abundant life was. But if you're writing your story and you're not connecting with God's story, well then you're just carrying baggage around. What kind of story do you want to write? The same old stuff day after day? You might as well be working for the highway department. The same depressing story day after day? You might as well be Gertrude. Or do you want to start with a blank page today and say, today I grew, I got better, I made a new decision. I hope your next decision will greatly enhance your story and make it one that not only you would like to read, but years to come, maybe somebody else will read your story. Wouldn't it be great if your story inspired somebody else to make changes in their own life? It's up to you. Think how silly a prayer it would be if you sat there saying, okay, God, I have a piece of paper here and I have a pencil. Please make my hand move so that it writes something good. That'd be silly. You are holding the pencil. You control the story. God's just watching, waiting to see what you do with the abilities and the talents and the skills he has placed in you. You got the pencil. You got the blank page. Right on. We'll see you next time.